15 seconds of shaky film. That solid takes to start an argument that has lasted almost 60 years. A dark, hair-covered figure walks across a creek bed in the northern California wilderness, turns its head to look directly at the camera, and vanishes into the tree line. 2 men where they saw something that should not exist. Millions of people since have argued about whether that something was an unknown animal or a man in a costume. Now, new AI-assisted analysis tools are being pointed at this footage for the first time, and the early results are pulling the debate in a direction almost nobody predicted. Before you decide what you believe, you need to understand exactly what's on this film, why it has survived every attempt to debunk it, and what happens when modern software looks at movement the human eye was never built to measure. Long before anyone owned a film camera, people living across North America were already describing something enormous moving through the deep timber. Coastal and inland nations from the Pacific Northwest down through the Rockies at their own names for a large, upright, hair-covered being that avoided human contact but was said to leave enormous footprints and a distinctive smell vein. Among the Alcomel-speaking peoples of British Columbia, one of these terms would later be anglicized into the word Sasquatch. Other regions used entirely different names, but the descriptions lined up in was that are hard to dismiss as pure coincidence: a bipedal figure, broad-shouldered, immensely strong, generally shy of people, and treated less like folklore and more like a dangerous neighbor you needed to respect. These weren't campfire ghost stories told for entertainment. In many oral traditions, the creature was discussed the way you discuss a bear or a mountain lion, a real, physical animal that happened to be rare, elusive, and best avoided. Parents warned children not to wander too far into certain valleys. Hunters described tracks they couldn't explain. None of this proved anything scientifically, but it established a pattern, for generations. Across cultures with no contact with one another, people were describing the same basic creature. European settlers largely brushed this aside. It didn't fit into the tidy zoological map they were building of the continent, and unexplained stories from indigenous communities were routinely dismissed rather than investigated. That dismissal held for decades, until construction crews started running into something in the dirt that was much harder to wave away. In the 1950s, logging and road crews working in the remote forests of Northern California began finding footprints. Not ordinary footprints, enormous ones, shaped like a human foot but straight to 15 or 16 inches long, pressed deep into soil in a way that suggested real weight behind them. These weren't excitable teenagers looking for attention. They were laborers doing physically demanding jobs in a isolated terrain, something on to evidence they had no framework for. The story that changed everything came out of Bluff Creek in 1958, when a bulldozer operator named Jerry Crew found a set of these massive tracks near his job site and made plaster casts of them. He brought the casts to a local newspaper, and the story ran under a nickname that stuck instantly: Bigfoot. The word gave the phenomenon a name, and the name gave it a life of its own. Sightings, tracks, and rumors kept accumulating around that same stretch of California wilderness for years afterward, turning Bluff Creek into something like ground zero for the entire mystery. Roger Patterson wasn't a scientist, and he wasn't a hoax stumbling into fame by accident, at least not in the way skeptics like to frame it. He was a rodeo rider and self-taught adventurer from Washington State who had become genuinely fixated on the Bigfoot reports coming out of Northern California. By 1966, he had written and self-published a book collecting sighting accounts and making the case that the creature deserved serious investigation rather than ridicule. He wasn't hoping to accidentally see something. He was actively hunting for proof, and he wanted a camera in his hands when he found it. That detail matters, because it cuts what was in the decades of argument that followed. Skeptics point out that a man who deliberately set out to film Bigfoot, and who had financial travels a viral film called Salve, had every motive to fake one. Believers counter that bringing the right equipment to search for something you're convinced is real isn't a species, it's just preparation. Both readings are reasonable. Neither one, on its own, tells you what actually happened at Bluff Creek in October of 1967. Patterson brought a friend, Bob Himlin, along for the trip. The two men rode horses into the rough backcountry around Bluff Creek, partly because the terrain simply wasn't accessible any other way. Patterson carried a rented 16mm camera loaded with color film. They weren't camping for leisure. They were there, by their own account, specifically to search for tracks or sightings worth documenting. On the afternoon of October 20, 1967, they got something neither of them expected to actually happen. Riding along the creek bed, their horses suddenly spooked. Harry knew that Patterson was thrown to the ground. Across the creek, on the opposite bank, something large was moving, upright, covered in dark hair, walking with an unhurried, rolling gait. Patterson scrambled up, grabbed the camera, and ran toward the figure while filming, which is exactly why the opening seconds of the footage are so shaky and disorienting. Himlin stood mounted, rifle in hand, ready to active the creature turned aggressive. It never did once Patterson's foot instead. The footage settles into the sequence that has been frozen under a microscope for almost 60 years. The figure is moving away from the camera along the creek bed, broad through the shoulders, long-armed, covered head to foot in dark hair, its legs bent in a way that reads as noticeably different from ordinary human posture. It doesn't sprint. It doesn't lunge. It simply walks, at a steady pace, seemingly unbothered by the two men chasing after it with a camera and a rifle. At one point, now famously cataloged as from 352, the figure turns its head and looks directly back toward the camera for a moment before continuing on and disappearing into the trees. That single glance has probably generated more academic and amateur argument than any other few seconds of film in the history of the medium. The entire encounter, start to finish, lasted less than 2 minutes. The usable footage runs just under a minute. After the figure vanished, Patterson and Himlin didn't chase it further into the woods. Instead, they went to the spot where it had been walking and found footprints pressed into the sand and mud, around 14 inches long, with distinct toe impressions. Patterson made plaster casts on the spot, and those casts have been studied for decades by people trying to determine whether they show any anatomical detail, hoax called plausibly fake, including subtle flexibility in the middle of the foot that differs from the rigid arch structure of a human foot. When the footage went public, it split its audience almost instantly into two camps that have barely moved in either direction since. Believers pointed to details that were, at the time, genuinely difficult to explain. Hair that moved fluidly with the body rather than hanging stiffly. Visible muscle definition shifting under the surface as the figure walked, and body proportions, long arms, wide shoulders, a shortened lower leg relative to the torso, that didn't match typical human building. Skeptics pointed to the obvious. A man who wanted to film Bigfoot happened to film Bigfoot, in a spot chose to search, using a camera brought specifically for that purpose, and the creature conveniently strolled away rather than doing anything a real wild animal encountering armed humans. Myth though, the skeptical case got its biggest boost in 2002, when a man named Bob Hieronymus stated publicly that he had worn a costume for the filming, claiming Patterson had paid him to walk through the forest in a gorilla-style suit while being filmed. A North Carolina costume maker named Philip Morris corroborated part of the count, saying he had sold Patterson a gorilla suit around that time. For a lot of people, that seemed to close the book. But the story never fully closed, because the physical evidence never lined up cleanly with the confession. No shoot from the filming was ever produced, examined, or preserved, which is strange, because a costume capable of producing footage this famous would have been a valuable and much sought after artifact. Commercial guerrilla suits from the 1960s look distinctly like off-the-shelf guerrilla suits. They didn't resemble the proportions or movements seen in the Patterson-Himlin footage. Multiple documentary teams over the years have tried to recreate the film using period accurate costume technology, and the attempts have consistently fallen short. The recreations look like men in suits, with human-style bouncing guides and Stephen fabric, not the fluid movement captured at Bluff Creek. Ironically, those failed recreation attempts have often strengthened the believer position more than the original confession weakened it, simply by demonstrating how hard the footage is to fake with the tools available at the time. And Bob Himlin, notably, never backed the hoax version of events. For the rest of his life, he maintained that he had witnessed something real and had no part in staging anything. He had far less to gain financially than Patterson did, no book to promote, no career built around the story, which makes his consistency an awkward detail for the tidy hoax narrative. Either Patterson somehow pulled off an elaborate stunt without his own filming partner knowing, or Himlin held a lie for over 50 years for no real personal benefit. Neither option is especially satisfying, which is part of why the case never actually closed the way the 2002 confession implied it would. This is where things get interesting, and where it's important to be precise about what's actually being claimed. In recent years, independent researchers, video forensics hobbyists, and some biomechanics-focused analysts have started running the restored, higher quality copies of the Patterson-Gimlin footage through modern motion tracking and computer vision tools, the same broad category of software used in sports science, animation, and forensic video analysis. This is not a peer-reviewed scientific study published in a recognized journal, and it hasn't produced anything close to definitive proof of an unknown species. What it has produced is a fresh, more technical layer of debate on top of a 50-year-old argument. The general approach in test analysis works like this. Software tracks specific points on the figure's body across every frame, calculating stride length, the arc of arm swing, the rotation of the hips and shoulders, and how the figure's center of gravity shifts during each step. Human walking as well-documented biomechanical signatures, our arms swinging counter-rotation to our legs to cancel out torque, our hips rotate in a specific narrow range, and our center of mass sits in a predictable place relative to our stride. A person wearing a costume is still a person, the suit changes how they look, not how their skeleton and muscles actually move. According to the people running tese frame by frame comparisons, several measurements from the Bluff Creek footage sit outside the typical human ranges, an unusually long stride relative to apparent leg length, a wider arc of arm swing than expected, and deep and shoulder rotation patterns that don't cleanly match ordinary bipedal human walking. Some analysts have also pointed to how the hair on the figure's body appears to move, responding to the motion of the limbs and, in a few frames, to air resistance, in ways they argue is harder to replicate with fabric or synthetic fur glued to a suit. Edge detection passes looking for seams, zipper lines, or mask boundaries have reportedly come back inconclusive, meaning no obvious costume seams have been confidently identified in the available frames. Though it's worth being honest that low resolution and film grain make this kind of test far less reliable than it would be on modern high-definition footage. It's tempting to read all of that as a slam dunk on the occasion for its real camp, and some corners of the internet have absolutely wrong with that framing. But responsible analysts, even ones sympathetic to the idea that something unusual is happening in the footage, are quick to add caveats that get lost in the more sensational detailings. Software trained primarily on modern human and animal reference data can misjudge a target when the input footage is this degraded, this old, and this short. No costume seems detected is not the same statement as no costume existed, it simply means the tool didn't find one, which could be a limitation of the footage rather than proof of authenticity. A skid hoax with an unusually well-built suit, favorable lighting, and a few seconds of distance from the camera could still produce ambiguous results under this kind of analysis. None of these technologies, or could, positively identify a new species. At best it can say a set of measurements is difficult to explain with the simplest hoax scenario, which is a meaningfully smaller claim than I prove Bigfoot is real. What these tools have done is sharpen the argument. For decades the debate ran on eyewitness credibility, gut instinct about how the hair moved, and dueling gorilla suit anecdotes. Now there is an actual quantitative layer sitting on top of that, stride ratios, rotation angles, center of mass curves, and that data is, at minimum, consistent with what believers have argued from the very beginning, that the movement in this footage don't obviously read as a person in a suit. Whether that's because it genuinely isn't a person in a suit, or because 60-year-old film grain is doing something modern tracking software wasn't built to fully account for, is exactly the question nobody can answer yet. Almost every other piece of Bigfoot evidence collected over the decades has quietly faded, blurry photographs, ambiguous audio recordings, footprint casts nobody can agree on. The Patterson-Gimlin footage is the one piece of evidence that has survived 60 years of scrutiny from anthropologists, Hollywood costume designers, biomechanics researchers, and amateur debunkers, and it still hasn't been cleanly resolved in either direction. That alone makes it unusual. Most hoaxes don't survive that kind of sustained technical attention. Most genuine and unexplained phenomena don't survive it either, but this one has stayed stubbornly in the middle for an unusually long time. Roger Patterson died in 1972, only 5 years after filming The Encounter, which undercuts the idea that he lived out alone, comfortable career profiting from an elaborate fraud. Bob Gimlin lived for decades afterward and never wavered from his account, giving interviews well into his old age in which he described the same events, largely the same way, without the kind of inconsistencies you'd expect from someone maintaining a decades long lie. None of that proves the footage is authentic. It simply means the obvious hoax explanation as always required you to overlook a handful of loose threads that never got fully tied off. Where does that leave things today? Roughly where it's always been, used with better tools pointed at the same 15 seconds of film. The indigenous oral traditions that described something like this creature for generations before Patterson ever picked up a camera are still sitting there, and is all done largely under-investigated by mainstream science. The footprint casts from Bluff Creek and the surrounding region are still debated by people who study food mechanics for a living. And now there is a modern layer of biomechanical and motion tracking analysis adding real numbers to a conversation that used to run entirely on impressions and arguments about guerrilla suites. Nothing here amounts to proof. A single frame turning its head toward the camera in 1967, no matter how many algorithms study its straight length in 2026, is never going to satisfy the kind of evidence a new species actually requires: a body, bones, DNA. Something a museum could put a name tag next to. What it has done is make the lazy version of the skeptical case, obviously a guy in a suit, a much harder sentence to say with total confidence than it was said to be. The footage that Roger Patterson and Bob Himlin brought back from Bluff Creek in October of 1967 is still exactly what it's always been, the single most argued-over minute of film in the history of an unsolved mystery, and now, for the first time, one being measured with tools precise enough to ask questions the human eye never could. Whatever was walking along that creek bed almost 60 years ago, it walked into the one piece of footage nobody has ever been able to fully take apart, and it's still walking there today. One frame at a time, waiting for someone to finally prove exactly what it was.